All right. Good evening, everybody. My name is Kelsey Maynard. I want to say thank you for tuning in to our small business webinar series. Tonight is going to be a very exciting night. I'm so happy to have our guest with us today. Again, my name is Kelsey Maynard. I am the small business advocate for Invest Atlanta. Now, Invest Atlanta is the economic development arm of the city of Atlanta, the economic development arm of the city of Atlanta. And what we do, we actually represent the mayor's office, and we follow the mayor's initiative, but we make sure we work in spaces of housing, affordable housing, we work in workforce development, and what you all know us for is small business development. So I like to tell people we nudge in the direction of how we want our city to be developed with programs. And programs like this are very exciting because what's been happening is we've been discussing with our small businesses about opportunities here in the city of Atlanta as the city grows, but also our small businesses are growing from mom and pop shops. They're growing from garage and basement businesses and businesses in your apartment to needing brick and mortar locations. And so when we got down to discussing with our small businesses the opportunities, when it came down to leasing commercial space, there was a how do you say this? Some confusion. There was confusion. Not the confusion, it's just ignorance. I don't know how to do it. I don't know. It's the same as getting a lease for a house or apartment. I don't get it. So we wanted to make sure we brought resources to you today that we can discuss not only the process of getting a commercial lease, but then negotiating that lease to make sure that the lease terms are conducive to your business. And who better than to have representatives of legal counsel here with you today to discuss the contracts of leasing your commercial space. So I want to take this time to say thank you all for tuning in, and I'll leave it up to Latrice and Quentin to speak and introduce themselves, and we'll get right into this webinar. All right? Ladies first.
All right, sounds good. Thank you for that introduction. So a little bit about me, I'm Latrice Smith. I'm the managing attorney at Thomas Law and Consulting. So primarily my business focus is business development, consulting, and legal needs related to your business. So that's going to be your transactional law, your organization formation, and also a piece of my practice as well as I'm a commercial real estate broker. So I work directly with tenant and buyer representatives and finding space. More specifically, that's going to be your office and retail space. So those are my areas of specialty. So those are pretty much my firm and what I do and how I help business owners on a day-to-day basis.
Mr. Johnson.
Hi, I'm Quentin Johnson. I'm a business attorney with Stanton Law here in Atlanta. We're pretty much a full service shop, everything from transactions, litigation, employment law, usually business side and the like. My specialty is working with businesses from formation to figuring out what type of entity is best for their business model and getting those things formed, helping them raise funds, scale up, work with contracts or anything like that that might come to, that they might need during that phase of their cycle, to working to maturity and potentially exit. That can be, either just winding down, selling, or anything like that. So that's pretty much what I do. And we're able to service all the other aspects around that.
Wonderful, wonderful. Great. So I do want to get some house rules before we get started. Some house rules, they're very simple. Number one, if you have any burning questions as the presentation is going on, be sure to hit that Q&A section and type in your question. Towards the end of the presentation, we will address the questions that are in the Q&A section, but some of your questions may very well get answered during the presentation. So if you got one that's burning, you don't want to forget it, if you're that type of person, just go ahead and type in the Q&A section, but we will address the questions at the end of the presentation. Yes, this is being recorded. Yes, you'll receive a copy of the recording as well as the PowerPoint that we're presenting later on this week. So I got that question answered already. Latrice, if you have a presentation, go ahead and pull it up for us.
Sure. Okay, so I thought it would probably to break this up from starting with when you're looking for a space. So the topic of the conversation is really negotiating that commercial lease, but to do that, you got to get to the space first. So I thought it'd be disadvantageous to you to not go through getting to that process, because all of those steps leading up to negotiating the actual lease are very important to what you will have in your actual lease document. So we want to start with, and I won't spend as much time on these because we do want to focus on that actual lease portion, but getting to that point. So the first phase in the process is going to be your site selection. So actually selecting that site. Next phase is going to be your letter of intent or your LOI, which is going to have those material, which will have those real estate terms listed. And the next phase is going to be actual lease execution, that lease document that you'll be signing. So phase one of that is going to be your site selection. So hire a commercial real estate broker. I cannot stress that strong enough. It's the same thing as for an attorney as well. But when you are negotiating, looking for these, the landlords, the brokers, they know if you have a representation and they know what they can and can't do. So if you're working with an experienced commercial broker, they're going to know the things that they can negotiate on your behalf. And not just a real estate broker. Residential real estate is significantly different than commercial real estate. It's a totally different animal. So making sure you got somebody that's experienced in your type of market. So again, I mentioned I'm more specific to office and retail, and I try to stay in that lane. If it's something outside of that, if it's industrial, I'm typically going to refer that out to another agent. So another broker. So that's a very important thing, making sure you have someone representing to you. And I know if any of you have tried to do it on your own, you know, they probably won't even respond to you. So making sure you've got that representation is a very, very important piece. Once you've hired that, and another important thing that I definitely shouldn't forget on the commercial real estate side, the commercial broker's fee is typically included in the landlord's pricing. So what that means for you as a tenant or a buyer is you can have representation, someone is advocating for you without any additional costs. So and no, it's not going to add on to your costs. They've already got that factored into their pricing. So to actually, if you don't have anybody representing you, it's just going in the broker's agent's pocket anyway. So after you've hired that commercial broker, they're going to typically have a discovery meeting with you. So that's going to be your opportunity to talk about your square footage, how much space do you need for your business, location. We've all heard that in business. That's a very important when you've got a business that's going to be storefront and also doing things like working with Invest Atlanta. We're going to need to make sure that's in the city of Atlanta, not in Atlanta proper. We're not talking about those areas we all know that are kind of Atlanta, but not really Atlanta. Has to be within Atlanta. So making sure your commercial broker is going to be able to check that for you, that you're meeting those criteria if you're wanting to work and use some of their funding. The type of real estate that you're going to need. So depending on the type of business you have, if you're a service-based business, you're more than likely going to be in an office location. You might want a high-rise building, a mid-rise building, or you might want a more of a colonial style that somebody could walk up to. The condition of the space, that's going to be another important one. Do you want a vanilla box? Are you open to a build out? Or do you want something that's ready to go that's going to require minimal build out? So that's what we call a second generation space. And then any specific needs that might be unique to your business. So if you're a restaurant, parking may be important for you. Depending on your business and marketing model, something like side frontage, street frontage may be important for you. Location in the community, depending on what your services and your typical marketing structure is going to be. So once you've kind of had that discovery meeting, your commercial broker is going to start seeking properties for you. So at this point, we've all got access to the internet and LoopNet, but brokers are going to have access to a specific program that's called CoStar and able to locate properties that are listed by other brokers. And we're going to also do that due diligence to check the rental rate, square footage, availability, and do all of that on your behalf, because now you've got somebody representing you in those factors as well. Then it's the fun part, actually going out and seeing the spaces. So then you'll have a tour where you'll physically go and see the spaces. When I'm working with clients after I usually send them roughly about 10 properties. We narrow it down to 3 to 5 that we're going to go tour, and we go out and look at those, and we may narrow that down to 1 or 2. And that's that space selection. And then then we'll go into that next phase of the process, which is negotiating the LOI. So your letter of intent is another huge piece leading up to negotiating that lease. You want to really, this is where those real estate terms are set. Most of the time, once we set those and agree to them with the landlord, we don't typically go back and negotiate those at the lease. The lease is more for negotiating those legal terms. So when we're negotiating the LOI, that's done with your broker, and your broker does that on your behalf. And that's that price per square footage. They're going to have an initial price that the landlord is offering. So we want to negotiate that down. 80% of the time, we're going to be able to get that down and get that rate down. Square footage, if we're looking at a larger space or even a raw or shell space, we might get to decide how much square footage do you need. Tenant improvement dollars. So that's another important piece. And if you don't know, you don't know. You can get the landlord to pay for some or all of your build out, depending on the landlord's situation. And if they have a team, they may even do the build out for you. But if you don't know and don't have a broker that's asking for these things for you, those are dollars that you're leaving on the table that could go towards starting your business and startup costs, or to help you develop and put use in marketing in other ways in your business. So those tenant improvement dollars are a big thing that we ensure to ask for. Most of the time, we're able to get that, a large portion of that, depending on the type of space. Office is a little bit easier to get those tenant improvement dollars. Retail is a little bit more difficult, but still we always ask and are able to try our best to negotiate some terms. So another factor that's big in what we're able to negotiate on tenant improvement dollars and also rental rate is the length of term of your lease. So thinking about the term of your lease and your business as well long term, you want that stability in a longer term lease. I recommend a minimum of 5-year lease. On office, medical, 7 to 10, anything with a substantial build out, you want to extend that build out dollar as long as possible. Because if you're going in and you're putting $100,000, $200,000 in a space, you want to make sure you're able to maximize that improvement dollars that you've put in. And also the landlord is going to be more open to giving more money on a longer term lease, because now he's got that committed tenant for X amount of years. Exclusivity is another important one, especially if you're in a market where you don't want any competition popping up next to you. We really want to try to negotiate that at the LOI phase for service providers, for people that want to kind of have a mark in a certain community. So you don't have you have a pizza restaurant, you don't necessarily want another pizza parlor 2 doors down from you. So those are the type of things the exclusivity protects you against. The next one that's often overlooked as well, but very important, are renewal options. So renewal options give you as the tenant the option to decide at the end of your lease if you want to stay. So if you've got a great location and you want to, everybody knows you're there in the community, you want to make sure you can, if you choose to at the end of your lease, go ahead and renew there. Typically that's going to be a fair market rate, and that's something else that we negotiate. So the price may adjust up or down depending on those renewal options and the price at the time. The next piece is going to be a guarantor. If you're a new business, or most landlords are going to require you to guarantee the lease. But the part of that can be negotiated is going to be the length of the guarantor. So we can negotiate things like what we call rollout options. So if you have a 10-year lease, we may say, okay, landlord, well, just require the guarantor to be 5 years. Well, they may come back and say, we'll agree to 5 years with what we call a 1-year rolling. So that means you'll be guaranteeing the lease for 5 years, but after 5 years, you'll only be liable for 1 year after that rolling period in the event of termination. Then you have your final LOI. Typically, you're going to sign that, and that's when we hire our attorney. So Quentin, I'll let you jump in and go through. I've talked a lot, and you want me to keep going?
We got to back a little bit.
You got that. Let me stay in my lane. Yeah, they lease execution. So now we're at the point where we've negotiated that LOI.
Wait,
that we have.
For real? Can we go back a little bit?
Sure.
I want to pause on LOI for a second, because a lot of business owners, number one, they don't typically go through brokers. There's some of these places that I've run into so many businesses, like I don't even have an official lease. Like I met the landlord and we just got an agreement. And we just have to understand, I just send them the money and it's not even on paper. So some of these places, like my uncle owns the building and he just lets me use the space, so this letter of intent is where you do what? Like with the letter of intent, does that mean that this space will be mine? Or is there possible for there to be several letters of intent out for the same space and whoever gets there first gets there first?
So you can have several letters of intent out. Most brokers don't like to do that. If they've got somebody slow poking around and they're not executing, they will go out and issue one. If there's right now in Atlanta, especially the retail market is very, very tight. So when you're in a tight market, they will issue multiple letters of intent. So you are still, time is of the essence always in real estate, especially in retail right now. Space availability is so limited. So you definitely want to be, if you've got a space, it's the right space, everything's working out, you want to be moving along. Typically, when a landlord is not going to talk to someone, once they've issued a lease to renew, and now we've got the attorneys involved, at that point, I'm going to say most because nothing is guaranteed in commercial real estate, it's the wild, wild west. But most of the time, once they've issued a lease draft, they're not going to continue to negotiate with other people. If they've got to the point where we've negotiated LOI, you signed that LOI, and then we've got a lease draft in hand, I personally have never seen a landlord go and continue to negotiate at that point.
Now, what's the time period typically between and receiving, like, does the broker request an LOI? Like, how does that get requested? And what's that time period between that and finalizing? Like,
that's a very good question. So I guess time period, I guess I'll start from the beginning. And all this is contingent on how quickly the business owner and the landlord's broker are moving in response. So in generality, it's typically once you secure the space, I usually send what's called a request for a proposal, and that has all of my business owners' name, their business, that gives the owner opportunity to look them up. If it's a new business, to request whatever they may need from them. So I typically send that request for proposal to start the ball rolling, to let them see the interest, see who the tenant is, and then they send me a LOI back, the letter of intent. So with the negotiating, that can take anywhere from a week to 2 weeks. I've seen them take longer and work quickly, but on average, that's about a 2 week. Then negotiating the lease, I would say about the same thing, anywhere from 2 to 3 weeks as well. So this process, truthfully, always 90 days. I wouldn't, 60 is pushing it, but this entire process, if everybody's moving along and being responsive, is a 90-day process.
Okay. Cool. This LOI thing I think that's a big missing piece. A lot of the conversation is about, like, when do I negotiate? When do I they just sent me a lease and I signed it. I just took what was on paper already. And so I think sometimes we miss this opportunity with the letter of intent. So I'm glad that we discussed it. You go on to the next one, my bad.
Absolutely. So again, that's a very important piece because it gives you an opportunity to negotiate those. And once they send that lease, we're not negotiating real estate terms anymore. At that point, we're negotiating legal terms. And that's when the attorney gets involved and we're negotiating those things. It's very, very, unless it's an exception that we go back on any of those things. So it goes further to your point of why having that LOI is so important, because that shift, once you've triggered a shift and kind of focus on everybody's part. Typically, the brokers are not even in the picture once the lease is out, and then the attorneys are usually doing. The broker may be kind of quarterbacking it somewhat, but at that point, when that LOI goes out, it's completed, the broker's out of the picture, and now it's attorneys involved. So you've switched gears. So that's why that's the second and last phase of the leasing portion of the process. So phase 3 is lease execution. So what is a lease? You mentioned that that's a big misunderstanding and misconception and I wanted to kind of talk about that and address that, and everybody to understand the importance that this is a legally binding document. It's a contract, it's binding, it binds you, and it also binds the landlord as well. So he can't come and say, you've got to leave. He can't come and say, I'm going to charge you more rent. But if you don't have this and you have a verbal agreement or you have a few emails sent back and forth, you do not technically have a lease agreement. So once you execute this, it doesn't not only protects the landlord, but it can protect you as well if it's done and created properly, which is the only way to do that is to have an attorney to review it. And again, just like with your commercial, you want somebody, your commercial broker, you want somebody specializing in commercial, the same thing with your lease review. Your family law attorney is probably not the ideal person to complete a lease review for you. You want somebody experienced in reviewing leases and commercial transactions in business or something of that nature that understands the specific terms that are in your lease. So those things, and so understanding this is an agreement, it is binding, and it's drafted. I guarantee you, your landlord had their attorney to draft this document. So you want to have your attorney reviewing it and making sure you're protected as well. A good attorney is going to advocate for you and get as many of those things. And I'm a negotiator where I want everyone to, we're gonna get the deal done. So that's the goal, but also protecting you as well. So that first round, I'm putting everything in there that I want to try to get. The second round is going to be, when I say rounds, that's going back and forth. That's me sending red lines, what we call red lines, to the landlord's attorney, getting those back. So I'm going to be really pushing to get those terms for you, that everything I can. And some things I'm going to get, some things we're going to meet halfway, and some things they're going to get. So, and that's okay. So my focus is going to be, I'm going to have the things I know are important for me that are kind of sitting over here to the side. I'm going to have some things that I'm prepared to give on, and I know where that window is. So those are the kind of the most important negotiating points. Sometimes people get leases and they're like, what is this? This is terrible. And I'm like, just hold on, we're negotiating it. That just means their attorney did their job. They're supposed to draft the lease to protect them. That
Right.
doesn't mean we can't negotiate it and make sure you're protected as well. So that it can be, there's usually a middle ground to be had on most of the deal points in the lease. So those kind of key components in your commercial lease are going to be additional costs, and understanding those. So that's going to be a combination of a few things. So you'll have, if you've got a triple net lease, if you're in a retail setting, that's more than likely what you're going to have. So a triple net lease means you have two costs. You've got your rental rate, which is dollars per square foot. Then you got your three ends in that triple net are going to be your taxes, the taxes and insurance for the building, your common area maintenance, and taxes and insurance are to the other two. So that's your triple net cost, and you will pay your prorated share based on your square footage for the space. The next most common is going to be a full service. And then there's some things in between as well, modified gross, but these are your most common. So full service is what you'll see more typically in an office building or office type setting. So that means that the landlord has priced it at one price and you don't have your two costs split apart. And a triple, no one is better than the other. Truthfully, in a full service, the cost is there. It's just allocated as one.
So these are only two types of cost structures?
You can have you can have a single net, you can have a double net, you can have a modified gross. So and any of those terms can land anywhere in between. So a modified gross may mean that you're paying taxes, but not insurance. It may be that you're going to pay some of the utilities, but not all of the utilities. So that's part of that LOI that we also asked for, that I didn't discuss, but we actually asked them to, if it's a triple net lease, let us know what's included in all those triple net charges. So that's done at the LOI phase. If it's modified gross, does that mean that you're included janitorial, electric, or you're not? So all of those details are kind of outlined more specifically in the LOI, and for sure in the lease. And the lease is going to have every single line item that's included in those charges for you. They can range from very nominal things, and they can go to more detail of what's included as well. Common area maintenance is another, which is CAM charges. So if you're in, most buildings are going to have some type of common area maintenance. That's going to be, if you're in an office building, your elevators, your common areas that people use. If you've got common area bathrooms that aren't specific to your area, landscaping, exterior lights, security, all of those charges kind of combine to create your common area maintenance charge. So that's CAM, and that's what the landlord is using to maintain those areas. So those are pretty much your additional costs that you're going to see in the lease, and how they're kind of broken out.
Right. Quentin, real quick, when you're dealing with your businesses and their growth, how do you help them facilitate through these parts? Because I don't want to address the Q&A section, but I know part of it is always like when we're dealing with tenant improvement or repairs and maintenance, and like the same way. And I think about walking through an apartment and say, hey, I see these things need to be fixed. How should that be negotiated? And how does that work? You know what I mean? Like we're seeing things that need to be fixed in the building that they've agreed to, or they haven't agreed to, but we want to make them do it. Tenant improvements. You say, I see you say repairs and maintenance. Like, how does that go? Because those are scary parts.
I guess on my end, like, when I started doing the legal review, a lot of the time that had been with what Latrice was talking about and the LOI, they've already addressed some of the, in the price, negotiating the price per month or how things are being paid. Latrice, you can step in if that's, your experience with that as well. But, once you get onto the legal review side of things, which, we can do a little bit more, you're more wanting to look at making sure those things are in the lease, and they're, that those things can't be changed, past the LOI. Make sure those protections are there that, that you agree to on the LOI are legally binding in this lease. So you're wanting to go through and, make sure that all the language is correct to make sure that you're protected there.
So I think you kind of specifically mentioned repairs and maintenance. So typically when we're negotiating that for the LOI, so what you see versus a retail versus office, in your retail spaces, you're going to be responsible for pretty much everything. The landlord and retail spaces don't cover much. Sometimes we can get HVAC covered up to a certain point. More so in office, a landlord is going to be more apt to cover those things in the repairs and maintenance. So just a little difference in retail and office. So in office, the landlord, and that's to be negotiated. That's a very big negotiating point, are the maintenance, specifically HVAC, things like plumbing. It really just depends. It depends on the building, the landlord, they're all up for negotiation, but that's something like Quentin said, we do handle that at the LOI point. So I'm going to always ask for the landlord to be responsible for those areas. They're usually going to counter, and sometimes we get to a point where we agree on a cap. So that means that the the tenant will be responsible up to a certain point. The middle ground is usually $1,500. And anything over $1,500, then the landlord has to step in. And it's typically HVAC is the biggest sticking point. Sprinklers are typically the responsibility of the landlord because that's in the building. As a tenant, you're responsible for your suite inside. So that's usually going to include your electrical, your plumbing, those things. But anything outside is the landlord or included in your CAM. So that's kind of the divide there, and HVAC is somewhere in the middle, and it really just depends on, and truthfully, when you're in tight markets like we are in retail right now, not so much in office, it's harder to get things like that because they know they've got the next person coming down. So HVAC is a tricky one. We can get it in office with a cap, but not all the time. And then the TI dollars, they don't necessarily, if it's a second generation space, it's probably going to have an HVAC there. And so usually I'm going to say if it's there, when we get this possession of the space, it needs to be in good working order. So I always ask for that. I'm usually able to get that. It needs to at least be working when you turn it over to us in a second generation space. And then if it's a new or shell space, they're typically going to be giving a substantial amount of TI dollars anyway. So that covers installing that new system as well in a shell space.
I'm clarifying this question. How important is it to have the renovations to the site happen before the first rent payment is due?
Oh my goodness, I can't believe I didn't have that in there. Like, that's a huge part of my negotiation that I'm always able to get. If it's a space, and that's 95% of the spaces that you're going to have to do something to, even if it's a second generation space, you're going to at minimum have to paint it and put some new flooring in there on a good day. So, but somewhere, most people on a second generation space are somewhere in the middle. So I'm always negotiating for what we call the build out period. I like to try to get 6 months. Most of the time I can. And that's time for the tenant to get your permitting, do your build out, get your architectural and your drawings done. So I really push for that 6 month period, and usually able to get that unless it's a second generation space and not much. But a clause in there is once you finish your build out, you have to start paying rent. So let's say we negotiated a 6 month build out period and you get finished in 4 months, then you have to start paying rent once you open for business at that point. Another big important piece that I didn't mention, and which leads into the this free rent. I think I had it on the list, but the free rent is another big one that we're able to get, that if you're negotiating on your own, you may miss out on. I don't know if I've done a lease that I didn't have some free rent in there. I'm always going to ask for time. This is after your build out period. So you have a build out period that's 6 months. Then when you open for business, we're asking for more free rent. And again, the longer the lease term, the more free rent we can try to negotiate. But the free rent is to give you time to get in, clients to know about you, you to start generating income. If you've got some type of system where people are making payments, if you're medical, if you're doing any type of medical billing, you need 60 to 90 days for credentialing. So I'm using those factors, and I very rarely get pushback on that to get you some type of what we call rent abatement, to get in there, start generating income, build your coffers back up. So that's another very, very important one that we didn't talk about.
Cool. That's all my questions. Sorry.
Okay, let's see. We talked about other legal terms, build out terms. So when I say build out terms, there are a lot that goes into that as well. Landlords are going to have when they're going to pay the build out. I like to always ask for do it in 50-50, halfway through and the other half at the end. So able to get that. Sometimes a lot of them want you to be in the space. And so when they say in the space, that means you're paying rent, you've got your final inspections, you've got an occupancy for the city. They're not giving you any money until you've got all those things. You've got your lien waivers in place. And so that's why having goes back to all the parts of having a solid business plan, having a contractor that can get all these things, because the landlord said, okay, I'm going to give you $100,000 in build out costs, but you've got a contractor that's not licensed and can't pull a permit. Well, they're not going to pay you the $100,000, and they're probably got somewhere in your lease and that you've got to have a licensed contractor there. So all that goes back to your business planning and planning effectively. So those are kind of the build out terms. They're going to say,
you said
stipulations on those type of things, architects, contractors, pay out. I'm sorry.
Licensed contractor?
Absolutely. And then all their subs need to be licensed. So that needs to be part of your contract. Another agreement with your GC is to have all of their subs need to be licensed as well, because they need to be pulling permits also. So
if I was to go to Home Depot and pick up a couple of day workers, this happens a lot.
I know it does. That's why I'm laughing.
Are they expected to have licenses? They sometimes have licenses, right? Is it something I should ask them, or is it something like if I go asking Home Depot Labor Day workers for it, it's like a street rule.
They're probably, I'm gonna be honest with you, they probably got access to somebody else's license. So if you go get you a day worker and they say they've got a license, they probably got their friend's license and they're going to use their license. So that's more than likely what's going to happen. So they might be using somebody else's license. It does happen quite a bit. If anybody's on this call, you don't need to be getting people from Home Depot. You need to be hiring a licensed contractor. And it is pricey. I'm not gonna act like it's not, but you're gonna have a license. You're gonna be in this space 5 to 10 years. You need everything to work like it needs to while you got your clients, customers, patients walking there. You don't need your light switch not to work when you walk in the room. So you definitely need to spend the money. And then if you're doing good negotiations, you're working with Invest Atlanta, you got the money to put into your infrastructure to make sure it's set up properly. So you sublease an assignment. That's another important one. That's a hard negotiating point. Sometimes you want to make sure you got this wonderful business and in 8 years you're ready to sell it, and you need to be able to sublease it, or if you want to bring somebody else in, or sign that lease to your new buyer of your business. So that's going to be having that negotiated up front. It's going to be very important. Landlord, depending on the landlord, may or may not volunteer that, but that's something you want to make sure is there, because you may move across country, you may get a wonderful offer, and a big part of what a buyer that buys your business is going to want are rights to that lease, because the space is if you got a successful business, the location is going to be one of those key factors in that business being successful. So they're going to need to have assignment options to that lease. And another reason, renewal options are really important as well, because when they get ready to sell, they want to make sure that they've got that option to renew that lease as well, the new buyer of the business. So renewal options come into play a few different reasons, and making sure those are there are important. Tenant and landlord default. You may think you might not have options there, but you do. They're going to be protecting themselves if you don't pay, or you're late, or there's a COVID or whatever. So we want to make sure there are options there for you as a business owner to be protected, because the landlord is going to be protected as well. Things that we can negotiate, and Quentin might can speak to this as well. The price that's charged if there's a default, if you're late, we can get that negotiated. Fees associated with being late, things that you have to pay and responsible for, like attorney's fees, we can get caps on those sometime. So just because landlord, we can't get rid of it completely, but we can definitely minimize some fees and time frames and rights associated with default by the tenant, or also if the landlord's in default for whatever reason that may be.
Right. I'd add, one thing you were talking about as far as just being late, even understanding like what is considered late on the lease to go into default. But you might have an agreement that says it's due on the 1st. We're all used to being able to possibly pay on the 5th or something like that. But if the lease doesn't say you can do it by the 5th day or 15th day or whatever after the 1st, then you're in default. If it doesn't say that clearly, and then you have to work on the options, and you have to figure out how you can cure that, if there's curing language, if they won't move on the due date or something like that. And also adding back to, I was thinking about Kelsey talking about the contractors, that getting someone who's not legit in that space might cause be a default of your lease, because you potentially ruin the space by having someone who didn't know what they were doing coming in, and they did something wrong and it weakens the wall or something like that, or sometimes in a lease the landlord might require you to get approval before that a certain contractor can come in and do certain work, and that could be a default if you don't have someone who is approvable.
Absolutely. Everything Quentin said, they all have all of those things in them, every one of them. Landlord wants to approve your contractors. But again, we add language in there that they won't reasonably withhold that. They're going to give us approval within X amount of days. You know, you can't be eating up our build out time, our 6 month build out time, waiting on you to approve my plans and my contractor. You know, I need a response within 5 days. So those are things, yes, landlord's going to have his protections in there, but we're going to also layer that with some protections for you. But very few and far between landlords that are going to be looking out for you. Some of them do, but they're definitely looking out for themselves. So we can add those things in there. You know, you can have that, that's fine, but you got to respond to us in a reasonable amount of time. I don't like reasonable amount of time. I want a set time frame. So anytime the ball's in their court and it's eating up my time clock, I need to know what that time frame is that you got to get it back. Because they'll sit there and you're in permitting, you're waiting, your architect's waiting, and you've got 6 months build out and they're taking a month to respond. Like that's eating up your time, and they're not gonna give it back to you if they're taking up time. They've got an issue with XYZ and then they don't rectified and you can't move forward with your build out. Well, we want to have language in there that says, hey, if there's an issue here that's related to you, landlord, then this happens. You've triggered something else to happen. So all of those are things that, no, we don't get rid of it, but we make sure there's protection there for the business owner. Another big one, insurance requirements. I had one I just finished negotiating, and he had a $5 million insurance requirement. And so the insurance carrier was like, well, I don't know if you're gonna be able to get that down, negotiated down. I was like, that's insane for an 1,800 square foot retail space. So we did get it down. They wouldn't go lower than 3. 3 was fine, but you know, it's still not 5. So that saves $200 or $300 a month, you know, right there. So it's little things like that that you can get that you don't even know to ask for. The guarantor clause, again, if you're a new business, there's no getting around that one. Even for existing businesses, they're going to want it, but we can minimize that. So we can say, we'll agree to the guarantor for 5 years. We'll agree to the guarantor, and then after that, the guarantor is released. So a guarantor is you, if you have a business, and I don't even think I talked about this, but if you have a business, you should be signing the lease in your business's name. Your business should be structured and formed where you have an LLC, you got an operating agreement, you're registered with the state of Georgia. And so your business is the one entering the lease. But most landlords are going to require you and other owners or another guarantor, depending on credit worthiness, to guarantee the lease as well. So that's essentially whoever's signing that guarantor is saying, in the event this business goes bankrupt, this person is going to be responsible for the remainder of the lease or until we get somebody else in this space. So typically I can try to get that. It's depending on the landlord. That's a tricky one. It's a very hard sell. Get 5 years and maybe you're rolling. But they're gonna, if it's a new business, that one's hard to get out of. It really is. That guarantor clause. But the mitigation for that is they do have to actively try to put somebody in the space. So let's say you're at year 3, whatever happens, you have to close the business. You're probably not going to be liable for the entire lease. It's just going to be till they get somebody else in that space. Then your attorney, you're going to negotiate those terms for you in your favor. Then you're going to execute that lease, and then and usually that guarantor clause has to be notarized. Again, you're executing it on behalf of the business. You will sign it. The business owner, whoever has signed it, signing rights based on the operating agreement will sign. But that is whoever has that rights to sign that, and then but you're still signing on behalf of the business, and then the guarantor will be signing the guarantor agreement. So I think that's kind of sums up, I think, is in a little nice little bow, with about a little bow on it is possible. The process. Quentin, you think of anything or anything to add to that, or points that I might have neglected to talk about?
I think you did a really good job in just covering everything. It's just looking at just a high level review of the of a lease is like, because you're at the LOI, you have the LOI that kind of like has those terms. When you're doing just even reviewing it for yourself, as you're working with your attorney, is to make sure that those things are put into there. Like if you want to double check and make sure it's the right amount of square feet, or that it's the correct address and location and those types of things. And there's always just knowing those like little, like you've mentioned, like little things that can make sure that you're protected and not just signing just because they send it over to you, like Kelsey was saying, some people were saying. There's some things that, for example, you might be able to negotiate. I don't know if you cover this, Latrice, but like if you, in the lease might have a provision that allows that if they have to move you, you get something that's comparable or something like that, because that's important. I've seen people to be in a position where they're like, we're shutting this business, we're shutting this building down. Can I help? Is there any compensation or anything that helps with moving to one of their other properties if they have more than one property, or however that works out? But knowing that those things are available, but also keeping in mind that this is commercial. Everybody's used to residential protections, that commercial law doesn't protect you like landlord tenant does for residential. So you have to make sure everything's here so that you have that contractual relationship established.
Oh, speaking of that, let's jump into some of this Q&A if you don't mind. I have a few questions. I've answered 6 through text because I think we covered them, but they just want to reiterate. But this one here is from George. He said, when looking to renegotiate or a renewal on a retail space, what are some ideas to motivate the landlord to reduce the cost per square foot or provide additional tenant improvement?
I'm going to always ask for both of those things. If you've been a good tenant, you've had a long-term lease, definitely trying to get in retail is tough. I kind of mentioned that previously because availability is not there. So when you're in a market where availability is tight, I'm be honest with you, getting the landlord to negotiate things like that can be tricky because they know they can put that space on the market and have it leased in 60 days. And probably for more money. So truthfully, if you've got you go back to your broker can negotiate those renewals for you as well. Definitely loop your broker in again, first and foremost. Then talk to them. You're going to push for that TI. If you've been a good tenant, you've been there a longer term, but that goes back to having that initial term be long. And you could say, I've been here 5 years, I've been here 10 years, I'm a great tenant. Do you really want me to go down the street and you have to put this back on the market, pay commissions again and all that? They got to pay it either way. They're going to pay it in commissions or they can pay it to give you TI dollars. So a good broker is going to have that conversation with them and say, we've got a good tenant here. We did this lease. Let's get this rental rate back in line with the market, or let's reduce this down. We've been here a long time. But again, it's a tough sale. I'm not going to act like it's not, especially in retail. It's really tough. In office, you can get a little bit more of those things because office landlords are used to giving, they're used to giving TI and they expect to have to do that. They expect to have to do some paint and carpet at the end of a term. But retail, it's tough right now.
Oh, question. So what does it mean that if, say you initially signed the lease and it was for 5 years, you come up on the renewal and the landlord is only doing year to year? What does that typically mean?
They're probably finna sell. That if no landlord wants to be dealing with a lease every year. So if they're doing that and you're in a prime real estate market, they're probably gonna sell the building. So I wouldn't suggest anybody doing that because it's something not right about that. Landlords don't want that. That's not something they're trying to do. They're probably gonna sell.
Okay. Next question. Say you signed an agreement, but it was not with the listing company whose name is on the door. They did not realize it until the end. Does this happen often? I got into an agreement with a company to rent out a space, but I don't think they have the authority to do so.
And is that more as looking at who the actual party is as the landlord, or is that?
Yeah, I guess the question is this: so you find a listing online, or somebody says, "Hey, a friend of mine has some commercial space they're renting out," and you go and you talk to them, and you've been communicating with this particular company or person, and now it turns out that you have an agreement with them, but they aren't responsible for the actual property itself. Does that ever happen?
I've never experienced that. If it does, the reason it could possibly look like they might not be the right people, they may have a property management company or a broker that's in the middle. And truthfully, it's going to be very hard to even drill that down because they've got keys and access to the space. They probably do. It's going to be hard to dig up because honestly, these owners have every building in a separate LLC. They have property managers, they have asset managers. There are a ton of people in a deal, but that goes back to having a broker. If you've got a broker representing you, you don't have to worry. They're a broker. If I'm finding a space for a client, I'm on CoStar. CoStar is extremely expensive. Nobody's listing anything on there to play. So I think the answer to that question is if you've got a broker, that kind of eliminates that. Because you're not calling, you're not just finding signs on buildings. The broker is looking on CoStar.
Got it. It says,
Just thinking this with the, sorry, I was saying just like she was saying with the name of the, who you know, like she said, holding in different LLCs, there could be, and the name on the lease could be completely different than, you know, the trade name of who you're talking to.
Right, understood. My shopping center has had a couple of large insurance claims. Should I be able to reduce my triple net exposure at renewal?
Oh, that's a tricky one. You cannot, it's tough to protect yourself in triple net because they're going to charge you whatever they're being charged. They are truly just passing down that cost one way or the other. If it goes lower, if the insurance rate is lower, you get passed down, but there's not much padding on there. There's not much negotiating. The cost is what the cost is, and you got the pro rata share of that. What I do try to negotiate at a renewal is tough. You can ask for, if you get it at onset, you can get it to survive. So I do ask for a cap on controllables, but insurance typically doesn't qualify. And you can speak to that too, Quentin. Insurance typically doesn't qualify as a controllable expense. So I asked for a 5% cap increase on controllables. But insurance doesn't count as a controllable. Unfortunately, that just is what it is.
Nope, hold on. Does anything that we talked about today have anything to do with, as well as with sales agreements? I'm curious, are we talking about sales agreement as in selling or sales agreement as an agreement between a business to business as far as products?
Which one are we referring to? So
Great question.
This is truly, so I'm gonna answer both. This is truly just leasing. Buying is very different. The things that you're negotiating and concerned about are very, very different. That's a whole nother webinar. So if we want to have that one, we can, but that is buying. Yes. Buying is a whole different, you have a whole different set of concerns, all still concerns, but a very different set of concerns, but you still have an agreement in place, which is a purchase and sale agreement. Still have key material things like your price, your closing date, the correct parties, who has to do what, when. But it definitely is a different animal for sure. But same principles apply. You still need a commercial broker that specializes in that area, not a residential broker. And I'm not knocking residential brokers. I was a residential broker a long time. That's just not what they do. And a lot of them try to think they can or say they can or act like they can. But if the bulk of their business is the residential properties, it's just too different. When I switched over from residential to commercial, I literally had to learn everything over again. Nothing it's so few things that goes over. I can even tell you. But again, when you're buying totally different animal, you're worried about things you need to consider. And again, you really want to have an attorney probably involved, depending on how big the transaction is and how versed the commercial broker is in sales. Not as necessary, but still, it wouldn't be bad to have an attorney look at that agreement as well.
Right, understood. It seems to be one of the last questions. Are leases for industrial and creative spaces treated similar to office spaces in terms of lease, CAM, and build out?
Yes, I would say so. Probably not as much build out. The build out's a little bit different. When you're talking about a creative space, that can look a little more like an office lease because you're probably going to be in a flex building. Your build out's going to be same. So I've done a creative space and I treated it just like I did with an office lease and was able to get very similar terms. Pretty much the same thing I would consider I want in an office lease. So a creative space kind of falls in the middle and depends. So it really depends on what you're trying to do. I would say industrial sits outside of that. Because you're going to probably have your raw space that's unconditioned, that unair conditioned, that's truly kind of raw space, and then you're going to have your office area. So you can get some, but you're not going to need as much, and most of those are going to be second generation. They usually build them out with some type of office in there. So you're definitely able to negotiate some of the similar terms with free rent, triple net, CAM expenses, but your CAMs are going to be much lower because you're not going to have as much exterior. You're really probably talking about a parking lot and lights. Truthfully, your taxes are going to be lower because it's probably going to be in the outskirts. You're not going to be in the city or a high volume area or somewhere where it's as desirable. So those things are going to be a lot lower, but your rental rate may be higher because you've got a lot of square footage. So typically your industrial spaces are pretty large. They're at least 7,000 to 10,000 square feet. So those are kind of the differences when you kind of get into industrial.
Wonderful. Let me see if I got any more questions. Nope. All right, great. So it's almost 7 o'clock. So we're gonna wrap this thing up. I want to say from the bottom of my heart, I appreciate you two, Latrice and Quentin, for answering the call to come here and have this conversation. I'm telling you, this is a hot topic and it's going to continue to come up. And I think we're going to continue to run into small businesses that have missed the LOI stage and negotiation stage. So I'm so happy that we've been able to have this conversation and record it, and it will be present, and it'll be emailed to everybody that's signed up for this call that's here today, and it'll be present on our website so you can go back and share with your friends who are about to get into these things. But most importantly, now I don't want to forget this. The most important part about this is Invest Atlanta. I told you we nudge in the direction that we need your business to go. And so with assistance and programs like this, we can do that. Now, get your pen out and write this website down. ATLinbusiness.com. That's ATLinbusiness.com. Now, ATLinbusiness.com is your small business portal that allows you to do an array of things. The first one that I want to tell you about is finding a consultant. So if you need to get some legal advice, these two came under the recommendation of the Atlanta Black Chamber of Commerce. We want to say thank you to Atlanta Black Chamber of Commerce, because if you go to ATLinbusiness.com, hit find a consultant and select the Atlanta Black Chamber, you can get assistance like this at no cost. So if you're like, hey, I'm about to start looking to get in a commercial space, and I want to make sure that I have somebody that can overlook these lease terms I'm about to agree to, you can do that. If you need marketing assistance, they can do that. If you need to set up your business, like Quentin was talking about, legally, they can do that at no cost. And so that's really exciting because not only is the Atlanta Black Chambers on there, but there's about 11 organizations on there that are there to help your business thrive and just thrive, period, in Atlanta. So that's really exciting. Also, if you're looking to apply for any small business loans, any of our loan programs, any grant programs, we have application assistance on ATL and business as well. We can actually get no cost application assistance. You don't know what to put on there. You don't know what documents they're asking for. You need assistance. Wonderful. Go to ATL and business, application assistance, click the link, fill out the information, and get the help you need. I can't be any more excited for that because honestly, we all need assistance. We need the help. And a lot of us can't afford to pay for it. So use the free resources while you got it. So right now we have the opportunity to go from atlinbusiness.com, atlinbusiness.com. I'm gonna say it again, atlinbusiness.com. Hit find a consultant, go to the Atlanta Black Chamber, and you get the assistance that you need. It's at no cost to you. I want to say thank you, Latrice. Thank you, Quentin, for taking your time out of this evening on Tuesday to talk about your professions and what wonderful work that you guys do for our small business. I really appreciate y'all. Again, my name is Kelsey. I'm the small business advocate for Invest Atlanta. We have another webinar next Thursday. Is it next Thursday? We have another webinar. Go to investatlanta.com, scroll down to event. You'll see our next webinar is talking about the do's and don'ts of financing when it comes down to getting funding. And we want to make sure that we're setting our business up accurately, correctly, so that when we're looking at our numbers, looking at our cash flow, our profit and loss statement, looking at tax returns, we're set up to receive funding. Because sometimes we're not. So we want to make sure we go through the do's and don'ts of how to do that correctly. That's our next webinar. And then we have a in-person network mixer at CODA, which is our new small business hub right there at Georgia Tech. So if you go to investatlanta.com, go down to events, you'll see what we have listed for our small businesses for this month. I appreciate you guys so much for sticking here with us, and we'll be back again next week with another webinar. Thank you so much. You have a great night.
Thank you.